After my Golden Demon piece last year took every ounce of my determination and patience out of me, I figured I'd need a year to take off and recuperate. But just when I was relaxing, knowing that I wouldn't have to go through all the stress that this competition puts you through, well, I done sucked myself back in. So today, we are going to build the scene that got me so excited to want to re-enter Golden Demon again in 2026. I think what I've come to realize over the last few years is that what really drives and excites me about Golden Demon are the categories that revolve more around storytelling. And don't get me wrong, a gloriously painted single model on a base still takes my breath away. But the kinds of projects that drive me to keep pushing well past that 100-hour mark are the ones with a little bit more going on. Does that mean that I know what I'm doing when I'm building these more complex scenes? Not even a little bit. Each year is like the very first time. But it's the friends that we make along the way that really count. Not sure if that applies here, but it seemed like the right thing to say. This year will be my first attempt at creating a piece for the duel category, something that I've always wanted to do but couldn't quite find the right two models to create that dynamic duel that I had in my head. In a recent video, I broke down the two models that I'm using for this duel and how I go about prepping and building models for Golden Demon. But today, we're going to complete the step that will either set this piece up for success or will doom it for failure, even before I pick up a paintbrush. No pressure. And that step, of course, is to build the display base that will be the foundation of our storytelling. I have the basic vision of our troll underneath a ruined bridge in a wetlands or swamp. I mock up the basic layout with cork and a pillar stuck down with blue tack so I can find the correct placement for these key structures in relation to the two minis. And of course, I am going to have to figure out how to make this fox feel like she's flying, not attached to this base at all. And I've got a trick up my sleeve for that. But that's for later. Once I got the basic foundation figured out in my head, I asked my buddy Eric to help me out to create a digital version of this mocked up in Photoshop so I could see it in basic 2 dimensions. I've never actually done this step before, but it did certainly help me visualize how each element in this base really is going to aid to the story I'm trying to tell. One of the hardest parts of building a complex scene and base is putting down certain elements without being sure of how they're going to work together on the bigger picture. Like I said, this is the first time I've mocked something up digitally, which gave me a lot of confidence moving forward and helped me decide what to change between this first mock-up and our final 3D piece. So now I can get right to work on building this base with my own 2 hands. And how I always want to approach this is working big to small. I want to make sure that my big, most important elements are placed first exactly where they need to be, and I work down from there. Now, something I've learned over the years in making Golden Demon projects, as well as just basing in general, is that more tools and stuff does not innately make a better base. To begin, I'm just using cork and bits. I need to figure out the desired height and general placement of this pillar. It is, after all, the most important feature of our scene, so we need to make sure that its foundation is set up just right before we add anything else. Once I get that structural step done with the cork, I remembered that I planned on carving out the base on this plinth in order to give us the feel of a riverbed. So I'm going to do that now before I add too much stuff that I'll inevitably break while trying to do this step. Yeah, there is going to be a water pour on this base, and that's not something I have a lot of experience with, although we've all heard the terrible horror stories. And the good news is the water pour step is the very last thing I'm going to do, even after the model and base is entirely painted and that models are affixed. So that's like a far future problem to worry about. Not today. With our riverbed carved and our scaffolding built with cork, it's time to start the real sculpting. And for that, I'm just going to use Epoxy Sculpt. This 2-part epoxy putty is really nice to work with. It smooths out really well. It's easy to sculpt into shapes, and it is sandable once it's dried. I'm still working with that big to small mindset here, establishing the most important and impactful aspects of this scene first. This ruined pillar that I hacked up from a new zombie dragon kit from Age of Sigmar will give us some strong vertical lines. And this was one thing that I realized needed changing from my digital rendering of this piece. It felt a little bit too condensed and squished together. I want this pillar up taller, adding more verticality to the piece. After all, that fox is going to be flying from almost off screen towards the troll, and we need that vertical element to really create more drama for that part of the story. Now there are 2 trees and 1 stump that I want to place right now as well, as they are the largest bits outside of that pillar and they each serve an important purpose. The largest tree will be in front of and just to the left of that pillar. It's going to showcase how its exposed roots are washed away and exposed, really highlighting this swampy environment. The angle that this tree is placed is also done with purpose. It is perpendicular to how the troll's clubs will be facing, which tightens our overall composition, and it leads the eye up and around the pillar to the fox. The stump on the right adds some more detail to the middle ground, and the final tree in the back really fleshes out the background, showcasing the 3-dimensional nature of our piece. And both the stump and tree are angled perpendicular to the troll's clubs, again, so that we keep the eye of the viewer moving around in a circle around the piece. As I fill out some of the ground with putty, I glue down some stones as well. These are smaller details and aren't as vital as those trees, but like anything I'm adding here, it's done with purpose. You see, I want this pillar to feel like it's aged and decayed over time, and more of its stones will have fallen and rolled their way down this hill over the years, eventually some of them ending up in the riverbed itself. And these will be partially sunken into our boggy terrain. It's important that we add them now while we're building the ground with putty so they fit in naturally. The last thing you want is a stone that sits perfectly flat on top of your ground. Now, naturally, riverbanks will slowly slope towards the water, but we also need some sharp drop-offs because this is such a tall vertical scene. So we're going to have to get a little bit creative to keep this verticality while having a nice flat stage for our troll to stand on in the foreground. Into these harsh vertical drop-offs, I place a few bedrock stones into the exposed earth. And this is pretty common in areas with flooding. And finding good real-world reference photos for things like this really help me understand how to build and feel confident that it looks realistic. And I contrast those sharp cliff edges with more gradual sloping as I'm placing a few more select rocks, again, closer and closer to the foreground. It's important that you really take in mind the foreground, middle ground, and background on your plinth, and not leave any certain element only in one of those regions. As I do this, I start working in the final of my smaller detail, which are the tall grasses, which start to make our scene feel a little bit more like a wetlands. Now, I'm not using a wide variety of different types of grasses that might bring in too much visual noise or confusion. I'm sticking with just different heights of this tall grass, as well as some cattails that'll be sticking out of the water. And this is another thing that I felt like I needed to change from the digital render. I felt like there was too much grass, too much going on in that piece. So when I did it in person, I'm being very thoughtful and very restrained in the amount of grasses that I add. The last thing we want is all these less significant details to hide or overwhelm the larger important details in the model themselves. After all, we did all that work to be purposeful with those details, so we need to let them shine. It's autumn, my personal favorite time of the year. Pumpkin, 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 pumpkin. Oh no, the deer got to this one already. Look it. It's frickin' bats. But autumn also means that temperatures can swing either way. Luckily for us, today's sponsor, Into the AM, has us covered for both. 2 days ago here, it was a beautiful sunny day, so a typical Into the AM graphic tee did the job. But this morning, when I woke up to walk the dog, it was 45 degrees out and windy. So I put on my Into the AM long sleeve, threw on my Sierra jacket, and I was ready to go. So I was comfy without compromising style. Into the AM now offers their favorite signature graphic tees as both graphic hoodies and long sleeves. And I don't know about you, but I prefer to dress like it's Halloween year round. And now all those kinds of styles at Into the AM are available for me no matter what the temperature outside. So no more having to choose between comfort and creativity. So why don't you join me this spooky season in picking up a little something for yourself so you can stay looking good even when the temperatures drops. And as always, if you use my link below and code NINJON at checkout, you get an additional 10% off your entire order on top of the sales or bundle pricing. One trick I've found to create really strong, tightly secured little bits like these grasses is to put a drop of really strong super glue right on the bottom and then place them into the base on top of a small ball of your putty and squish it all the way down until it's touching the base. From there, I smooth out the putty, angling it down into the ground itself, keeping it a little thicker at the base of the grass to really hold it firm when that putty then cures. Just make sure that the grass is standing straight up and not leaning to either side before that glue completely dries, and you'll be all set. Now, the singular cattail bit that's right on the front of this base is placed there purposely. It creates the boundary of our foreground in front of where the troll will be standing. We don't want to feel him totally separate from the back half of the scene. Putting a small detail in front of your model on its base is an easy way to ensure they feel connected and a part of the environment. This part of the base building is so fun to me because you're seeing it really come together in real time, and it's quite relaxing just to go around the base with your putty, adding little bits, smoothing it out, deciding if you need to add another rock or two. And as I get that just about finished, I decide I want to place my exposed roots in that front vertical section. I'm super happy with the decision to add these gnarled exposed roots from that tree above that have been washed away and shown to you from that prior flooding. And when I do any of this work, I just place the putty with my regular dental tools, and then I come back in with my clay shapers. It's really easy to conform, to add the right level of detail or curves, or really just create a natural transition from that little resin bit to the base itself. One thing I realized I hadn't been taking a lot of footage of, but I should have throughout this building project, is how often I actually took my troll and kept placing him back on the base to see how he worked with the amount of details, with the angles of everything I was creating in the earth, how the riverbed worked, and how many rocks to add. I constantly want to be testing your model to see how they fit in the scene so they're not overwhelmed. At some point, you're going to be ready to place the footings of your model right on the base so they'll have the perfect spot to stand. And when I do this, I put 2 discs of putty right where his feet will be. I then put Vaseline or Nivea lotion on the bottom of his feet, and I press them down into that putty, making sure he leaves crisp footprints behind. And then because his feet are properly lubricated, I just pull them out of the putty, and it's all set for his final resting place after painting. Just make sure that when you do that, that your model is standing perfectly level and at the correct angle you're looking for. If they're at all off and their center of gravity feels weird, it's just going to ruin the entire immersion of the scene. So make sure you get this part right before that putty dries. We're in the home stretch. Our second to last step is the texture paste step. Now, it's very important for me to use texture paste that has a wide variety of grit sizes and shapes within it, and it's not so overloaded with that particulate matter that is super thick and hard to work with. I find that basing paste like this stuff from Bear Cavalry gives me a much more natural feel, and I'm not bombarded with my whole base covered in lumps and bumps. It's better to have too little than too much texture, because you can always add more layers of this later, and even after you've been painting this base. You can just slap it on and then paint another layer of paint on top of it. I lay the texture on thicker in areas that this grit, gravel, and rocks would be found in nature. Typically, that means low-lying areas where erosion would deposit it and where it would naturally settle, like at the base of rocks and plant life. Once I place a thicker area of the paste, I wet my brush with water, and then I feather the edge of the paste with my brush so that the water helps erase the line and smooths and evens out the texture of the grit. This is a quick step that I've found adds a nice level of refinement and realism to my basing. So I do this quick water feathering step on all of my bases, whether it's for gaming or for competition. Now, before we get to the very last step of this base build, I wanted to remind you how little you actually need to make good looking bases. This entire thing is just done with cork and super glue, some epoxy putty, whatever bits I wanted to use, and some texture paste. That's really it. You don't need a ton of fancy things to make a really good looking base. And I wanted to share that because it took me a good while to realize that the planning and composition of an exciting miniature scene is much more important than whatever expensive stuff you'll use to actually make it. And on to the last step to get this base done today, and that is to make sure all of that vertical height that we've added has a nice clean crisp edge, just like the sexy black resin from the Tarot Model Maker plinth that I put it on. And for this, I'm trying something for the very first time, and that is using Milliput Black. I've heard that this stuff is a nice, super fine grit putty and takes to sanding very smoothly, very well. So I just mix them up, and I use a latex glove with, again, a little bit of Nivea lotion or Vaseline on it, and I push the putty really firmly into the side of the exposed cork and smooth my finger back and forth so it's not only nicely adhered and level and flush with the cork, but we're trying to smooth out that process so the sanding later doesn't take so much time. Once I get the entire side covered, I can go back in 30 to 60 minutes later and trim away any extra bits of that Milliput that's kind of folded over or encroached on the base top itself that we've been sculpting. That's easy enough to remove. And then I just set it up to cure, and I can sand it and finish it later. And other than that final sanding, which usually takes me 3 or 4 steps of higher and higher grit, eventually getting to wet sanding to get this perfectly smooth, our base itself is done, and it's ready for a troll and our fox to start their duel. I'm looking at the scene, I'm like really happy, really excited to start painting, which is the whole goal leading into this, was to take that digital mock-up and put it into 3 dimensions, make some tweaks, not overload it with too much stuff, and make it a little bit taller and vertical to add more drama to our scene. And technically there is still more work to do on the base. Like I said, the sanding of the sides and the water pour, but the water pour is the very last step. For now, I'm excited that this is it and I can envision the scene. And as I leave in a few days to go to VinciCon to hang out with the painting boys, I am pumped to start painting the troll. Massive thank you for hanging out today and watching this, the second in the series of my Golden Demon project videos for 2026. I truly appreciate your views, your subscriptions. I appreciate the cool kids that join me over on the Ninja on Patreon. You get some fun rewards like my behind the scenes videos every Wednesday, as well as access to the Ninja on Discord server. And of course, a massive thank you to those of you that have pre-ordered the deck of many colors. Don't worry, manufacturing is starting very soon. So make sure you want to head over, if you haven't yet, and pre-order your decks so you get them in the very first shipment. Now I'm going to be back next week with another fun video, and I hope to see you there. I also hope that you find some time in your day to slay the gray.